Alright, what is going on everyone? Welcome back, man, to yet another King Japes video. Now today we're going to be talking about Kodak Gold because the other day I actually did a grad shoot with my buddy Nico. Nico, thank you so much really quick just for letting me shoot your grad photos and also just letting me share the photographs as well. So huge shout out to Nico. I'm going to leave a link to his Instagram in the description below. But we made a lot of photographs, and amongst the 7 rolls of film that we shot 2 rolls of Kodak Gold. Out of all of the film stocks, the one that I feel performed the best out of them all was Kodak Gold, and so that is why we're going to be talking about it today. I'm going to give you guys kind of like a first impressions of this film stock. This is my first time shooting this film, and I'm also going to be talking about how I would recommend shooting this film for the future. So with that said, let's jump right in.
My favorite photographers over here. I gotta stroke the ego a little bit, but all jokes aside, really happy. We got some good friend shots over here, my homie Remy. We got some real
Okay, so you guys know, man, Kodak Gold is my favorite 35mm color film. I've made countless videos on just how amazing I think it is. So when they announced it in April that it would be available for 120, you guys already knew I got super excited. Now with Kodak Gold 200, I feel like the only difference between the 35 and 120 version is really just the format. After looking at the photographs from Nico's shoot, it's the same film stock that I know and love on 35mm. Now, the first thing that we're going to be talking about with Kodak Gold, of course, is obviously some of its characteristics. So first and foremost, it is a 200 ISO film, which means that it's best shot during daytime or where there's a lot more available light. I never even shot Kodak Gold for portraits. This was really my first experience handling the film for a portrait shoot. So even though I was familiar with the film stock, I was really surprised with the results afterwards. All right, so the first photo that we're going to be putting up here is a photo of Nico standing next to kind of like this egghead. And as you guys can see, man, just the tonality of the colors are amazing. Same thing you would get with the 35mm Kodak Gold. One thing that I do want to point out is that this film really gives you that warmer tone, which can be a very beneficial characteristic for your portraiture. Now, warmer tones when it comes to portraits is always nice, but if you guys can take a really close look here, even though it is on the warmer side of things, there's no weird color shifts going on. It all kind of looks pretty neutral. I'd say there is a little bit of magenta tint, but that's nothing you can fix in post. But that was the first thing that I realized, man, that the tonality, the warmer tones just made it look really, really nice and suitable for portrait photography. I'm going to be throwing a couple more photos up here as I talk about the film, but as you guys can see, man, very, very beautiful film stock. Secondly, the next thing that I want to talk about though, folks, is that when you shoot this film, because it is a warmer, kind of film stock during golden hour, you might want to be a little bit careful. So this is where I feel like I ran into my first issue with this film stock, at least for the situation as well as the portraits that we were making. Now, this was shot backlit. Obviously, I was going to be overexposing this very slightly just to expose more for the face. And as you guys can see, during golden hour, it does get pretty orange. And I mean, that's expected, right? With Kodak Gold, it is a warmer film stock, but it does really get orange, especially if you are shooting in like the last 10-15 minutes of sunlight. With that said though, folks, pretty much anytime during the day, as long as the sun is not in kind of that super saturated colorful position, you are going to be fine. There's going to be really no issues with it. And even in this situation, I don't think it even looks bad. I think it adds a little bit more character to the photograph as well as the film stock itself. But folks, not everyone is into this sort of look. And so, this overexposed kind of Kodak Gold look, especially when it's like backlit, it might not be for you. But if this is something you're into, this is what the film looks like shot backlit. Now for this shoot, I was pretty much shooting primarily with the 105 2.4 and my Pentax 6.7, this exact setup right here. And I was really kind of just metering for box speed. I shot this 200 ISO, but I did overexpose here and there, maybe if it was like backlit, or I kind of just adjusted my exposure on the fly, but I did shoot this film box speed. But before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit today about our sponsor for this episode, Skillshare. Now, before we did this shoot with Nico, I was on Skillshare looking for any real tips or just something that I can learn and pick up before the shoot, because there's always room for improvement. Now, I discovered this class by Brandon Wolfel called Instagram Worthy Photography. Now, I personally took this class, and a lot of the points he talked about really resonated in the shoot for that day. He talked a lot about planning the shoot. He talked about choosing the right photos to deliver to the client. And he also even touched on equipment and settings, and it really made a huge impact on my session with Nico that day. And even though I have done many shoots in the past, I feel like there's always a new skill to discover on Skillshare, especially if you are a photographer in this day and age. If you guys want to check out Skillshare, they're actually hooking it up for the first 1,000 people that use the link in the description below. You guys can get an entire month of Skillshare for free. And this means you could also take the class that I took before the shoot with Nico. But remember folks, this is a limited thing. There's only going to be 1,000 available spots. So click that link in the description below and check out Skillshare. But the next thing that I want you guys to take a look at, folks, is the grain. The grain is really fine. I mean, it looks like a 100 ISO film where, 100 ISO, you don't really see the grain until you zoom in and, kind of look into these smaller areas. Then you'll see the grain. But with Kodak Gold 200, for it being a 200 ISO film, very fine grain. And this is good for portraiture because, you don't want to have someone's face looking extremely bumpy or grainy. And in this case, man, it really worked out. So it's kind of making me think that this might be a good alternative to something like Portra, especially because it's offered at a much cheaper price point. I mean, I think it's like $5 less than your roll of Portra 400, which is a lot of money you could save on film. But this really surprised me. Even in areas where there wasn't a lot of available light, the grain was still very fine, and it wasn't something that I needed to worry about. So big points on Kodak Gold for having nice and fine grain. Now, in the next segment of this episode, I want to talk a little bit about how I would recommend shooting this film stock, as well as if I would recommend it, and kind of what I see Kodak Gold for. All right, you guys, so now let's talk about how I would recommend shooting Kodak Gold. Actually, here we go. Boom, got it right in front of me. Kodak Gold. Woo! So obviously it is a 200 ISO film, and again, we touched on this a little bit earlier, it is not the fastest film stock. So the first thing that I would recommend is choosing the right time of day to shoot this film. I probably would stay away from shooting this film at night unless you have a super fast lens and maybe a tripod. I think that would actually be pretty interesting to see. But this is strictly and primarily a daylight film. It's intended for you to go out and shoot where there is available light. So 200 ISO, I would shoot this again in like open sunlight, golden hour even. There was a couple of instances where we were in like a shaded area where the shutter speed dropped, even though it was opened up all the way, the lens was opened up to like 2.4. The shutter speed dropped to like 1/30th of a second. So that kind of goes to show that it might run into trouble in like super low light situations, especially if you are indoors with not a lot of light. But with that said, I've seen a lot of people shoot Kodak Gold on 35mm on like concerts. As long as you have like a flash, I think there's a really interesting combo to be had shooting with flash and Kodak Gold. But because this is 120 and most of us are shooting with 6.7s or TLRs, my biggest recommendation would just be to shoot where there is available light, where this film can handle that light. Now, to answer the question what I think Kodak Gold is for, it's really just an all-purpose film. There's not really one thing it's known for. Like Portra, it is intended for portrait photography, but everyone shoots portrait, whether that be in the wilderness or in the city. It's just a very universal film, just like Portra 400, with the caveat of it being 200 ISO. So keep that in mind, folks. I personally would shoot this with landscapes. Definitely for portraits, that warmer tone gives it this nice kind of magical feeling and look to it. I would also really want to try this out for street photography. I think this would give you really interesting looks, kind of like that vintage look that we talked about in the past with this film in 35mm. I think Kodak Gold really gives you that nice vintage feel and look to your photographs. It doesn't look as clean as Portra because of the subtle warmer tone to it, but it's also not as kind of gritty as something like Fuji Superia. Like if you were to dress someone up in 90s clothes and take some photographs with them with this film stock, and you didn't tell me when you took these images, I would believe you if you said it was taken in the 90s. It just looks like that look, very vintage feeling kind of characteristics coming out of this film stock. So if that's something you're into, man, I would definitely recommend shooting some Kodak Gold 200 in 120, of course. I think this is going to be huge for a lot of people, especially for people who do portraits on film. This gives you another option, another great option for portrait photography, other than, you know, your Portras and Fuji 400H, which again, rest in peace. But ladies and gentlemen, that is going to wrap it up for my end of everything. I want to turn the mic over to you and just ask you guys, do you have any experience with Kodak Gold 200? What do you think of it? Is it a good film for you? Is it not? You know, do you prefer this film? Have you shot it? Let me know in the comment section down below. I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say. But I just want to say really quick, you guys, thank you so much for always supporting the channel and just consistently coming back to watch these videos and episodes. Making these videos has always been my passion, and I'm really glad that we do have a community here that we can kind of share with each other. But thank you guys for tuning into this episode. I'll see you in the next one. As always, Minolta Gang.